In the summer of 1989, readers of many local newspapers in the UK found something a little unusual. Buried in the personal section, surrounded by lonely hearts and marriage seekers, was an enigmatic little advertisement that simply read, "Your own personal Jesus," and then a phone number. No one knew what it was for, but anyone curious enough to call and find out was greeted with this. Reach out, touch faith. Once they realized it was a marketing campaign for Depeche Mode's new single, and not like some weird pervert, many papers pulled the ad, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the strategy had worked. The dark, provocatively named song had stirred up controversy, and with it, media attention, and by the end of the summer, Personal Jesus was everywhere. Let's take it apart. The song starts like this. Reach out, touch faith. And the first thing I notice is the intense reverb on the voices, which gives it this larger-than-life sound. To draw the obvious comparison, this sort of over-heavy reverb is a staple of theatrical depictions of the voice of God. And that's not the only way this opening line seems to borrow the aesthetic of divine authority. The swelling noise filter that leads into it creates a dramatic arrival, and the two-part harmony is singing in octaves. The octave is a really special interval. The two notes are so similar that they blend almost perfectly, but that similarity also means there's no extra harmonic information, so that blend sounds hollow. The two singers become a single, booming voice with unnaturally rich overtones, giving the narrator a commanding presence that, combined with the lyrical command to reach out and touch faith, positions them as some sort of holy figure. And in a different song, that might have been genuine, but whatever claim this person has to divinity is immediately undercut by Martin Gore's guitar, playing one of the sleaziest riffs I've ever heard and exposing him as a charlatan. Or actually, quick side note on interpretation. The band themselves seem to have a slightly less cynical view of the meaning of this song. Lead singer Dave Gahan describes it as
a very optimistic song. What it's saying is that if you can grasp onto something that's much bigger than yourself and believe in it, then you have a faith, and it's always there.
Will Gore, the band's primary songwriter, said,
"It's a song about being a Jesus for somebody else, someone to give you hope and care. We play these godlike parts for people, but no one is perfect, and that's not a very balanced view of someone, is it?"
Even Johnny Cash, who covered the song as part of his American Recordings series, called it
probably the most evangelical gospel song I ever recorded. It's where you find your comfort, your counsel, your shoulder to lean on, your hand to hold on to your personal Jesus.
So while it's certainly dark, it's also meant to be hopeful, and if you're a fan of artistic intent, please do take that into consideration, but personally, yeah, I don't hear it. To me, this is a song about a cult leader or a scam artist using religious iconography to take advantage of vulnerable people seeking spiritual comfort. You can find that in the lyrics, where he specifically targets isolated individuals and claims the universal power to forgive on demand. And musically, the song doesn't sound like it's about a savior. It sounds like it's about a predator. And maybe that's because the first version I heard was the Marilyn Manson cover, but it's there in the original too. Gore says he was inspired by the story of Priscilla Presley, Elvis Presley's wife, and if you're not familiar with that, all you really need to know here is that he started courting her when he was 24 and she was 14. So if this song gives you hope and comfort, great, I don't want to take that away from you. Art can mean many things to many people, but it's not how I hear it, so it's not how I'm gonna analyze it. But let's talk about why the song sounds so dark and greasy, starting with the guitar riff. This is actually the first guitar-driven song the band ever released. Up to that point, they were mostly known for their use of synths. By the end of the 80s, though, they were hungry for a new sound, and Personal Jesus replaces the slick, polished approach of their earlier work with a rougher, more distorted atmosphere. In the context of the band's history, even the instrumentation is telling you not to trust the narrator. And that's driven home by the rhythm, with its heavy shuffle groove and just enough syncopation, evoking the sound of raw, debaucherous parties. The dude's cult may be a cult, but at least it's one of the fun ones. And the riff contains very little harmonic information. There's only 3 distinct pitches, and 2 of them are F sharp. Gore throws in a couple A's here and there so you know it's minor, but beyond that, it's just octaves up and down, giving it this blank, empty sort of sound. And that emptiness is mirrored by the lyrics, which make promises whose impressiveness are matched only by their vagueness. I'll make you a believer. I will deliver. Reach out and touch faith. These sorts of platitudes are a hallmark of religious exploitation, both because it lets your target fill in the blanks with whatever answers they find most appealing, and because if you avoid making specific claims, you can't be proven wrong. The man is your your personal Jesus, and that means exactly what you want it to. Underneath that is the drums. Although I had a hard time figuring out exactly which drum that is. My best guess was floor toms, and looking at live videos that seems to be how Alan Wilder plays it, but it didn't quite sound right. I looked up a bunch of transcriptions, but no one seemed to agree what this was, and then I found a presentation by the song's producer, Flood, where he talked about foot stomps. And it's such a great choice. Instead of the driving kick snare of a basic rock beat, you get this flat marching effect that feels so massive, but also so human, painting a picture of our cult leader's many followers. But it's not just a straightforward march. The metronome pulse of the stomps is augmented by this rhythmic approach note to set up beat 3, drawing your attention to the halftime backbeat and making it feel a little less mechanical and a little more fluid. It's like you're witnessing some sort of ritual. And then there's my favorite part of the riff, the synth. This is Depeche Mode after all, the guitar can't have all the fun. After 4 bars, it's joined by this swelling figure that re-emphasizes a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. It's an F sharp, once again hitting the root with no other information, and while it starts early, it hits the apex on beat 3 right alongside the higher octave in the riff and the rhythmic resolution of the stomps. But more than any of that, the point is the dark, oppressive, industrial atmosphere it creates. To me, the image it evokes is like an alarm going off, but pitched super low. You still get that sense of urgency that, as modern humans, we've learned to associate with repetitive, strobing sonic pulses. But the bass register makes it harder to pinpoint, so the emergency seems to envelop you, drowning you in synthetic anxiety. It's yet another warning sign that this man isn't who he seems. And narratively, I also love that they don't bring it in right away. They give you just enough time to start falling for his trap before the red flags start popping up. That leads into the chorus vocals.
Your own personal Jesus.
Gore's higher harmony is gone, but the thick reverb remains, and Gahan's confident baritone delivery gives the lines a sneering quality, oozing charisma and deception in equal amounts. It's a voice you want to trust, even though you know you shouldn't. And he milks that effect for all it's worth with his slow start-stop phrasing, adding a long pause after every couple syllables to draw you in and build anticipation for the release at the end of the sentence. You know where he's going, but he's going to take his time getting there, slowly revealing his divine truth. That gives way to a slightly more continuous line,
Someone to hear your prayers, someone who cares.
where the phrases at least cover complete thoughts, even if they're still sentence fragments. Alternating between these two modes of delivery gives him an aura of complete control, commanding attention when he wants it, and loosening his grip when he needs to appear more approachable. After that, we finally get some harmonic motion, with the riff jumping up to B, then walking back down the scale to F sharp. Moving to the 4 after a long stretch of 1 chords is a pretty clear nod to the blues, and coupled with the song's themes and tone, I can't help but hear the reference to old stories of bluesmen selling their souls to the devil. Of course, the historical accuracy of those legends is complicated, but this isn't a video about history. It's a video about artistic imagery, and in a song like this, that sudden appearance of an unambiguous blues gesture, especially one that erupts out of a constant droning, harmonically ambiguous groove before melting back down into it, is the sort of thing that's been used over and over in pop as a musical signifier of a demonic presence, or at least a subversion of the divinity we're being told to listen for. It also coincidentally gives us a hell of a lot more information about the scale. Up to now, we've just had F sharp, A, and a couple E's from the vocals, but these 2 bars fill in basically every missing note in F sharp minor. For a brief moment, we're seeing the full picture, and then the riff comes back and the rest of it disappears again. From there, the chorus repeats with a couple more synthetic layers added, most notably this laser-sounding bass part, which does a sort of ping-pong delay thing where it bounces back and forth from left to right in the mix, momentarily disorienting you to set up a massive drum fill that carries us into the verse. And that's another cool thing about the foot stomps. Building your percussion part without a drum kit means you can use the mere existence of actual drums as an accent, making Wilder's already powerful reverb-soaked fills even more exciting by contrast to the dull drive of the marching stomp pattern. In the verse, Gahan switches to yet another new kind of phrasing,
Feeling unknown and you're all alone. flesh and bone by the telephone.
With long, almost run-on sentences delivered with fluid precision. This part is the real sales pitch, and he's coming at you smooth and fast. But what really grabs my ear here is the low notes, or rather, they don't grab my ear at all. Whenever he drops down to a low A, his tone gets so thin and quiet that sometimes it's easier to hear the echo from the previous syllable than the thing he's actually currently singing. And I want to be clear that this is a choice. He can hit this note. It's low, but it's not like out of his range. Here he is projecting an even lower note later in the album.
I'm starting to grasp what is in my own hands.
But throughout Personal Jesus, he consistently fails to commit to this pitch, so why? Well, I don't know what he was thinking, but for me, it gives the delivery a sense of incompleteness as words and promises disappear before he's even finished making them. Especially with the echo carrying over to cover it up, it feels like there are holes in his story, again implying that maybe it's a bad idea to trust him. Underneath the vocals, the accompaniment has also changed. The riff is gone, taking much of the soundscape with it. The stomps carry through and they add this triplet noise pattern that, despite being pretty busy, is thin enough in timbre that rather than filling up the space, it mostly just highlights how empty it is. And finally, we have the bass line, which outlines the song's first real chord progression. Granted, no one's actually playing those chords, but it's synth pop. Harmony via bass line is pretty much the norm. This starts with 2 bars of F sharp to anchor us in the same key and let Gahan deliver his entire first line before things start moving. As the story develops, though, the chords pick up and we get this little plagal cascade where each chord's root is a perfect fourth below the last. Or okay, this one actually goes up a perfect fifth, but harmonically it's the same thing. It's still A to E. Point is, this is a classic minor progression, one that would go on to be the basis of an incredibly common chord loop that I already have a whole video about. In theory, this B could just drop down to F sharp to complete the resolution, but that would cause a bit of a problem with the meter. Remember, they gave the initial F sharp 2 bars to start with. That pushes the rest of the loop forward, so rather than coming at the end of a 4-bar phrase, the B sits at the start of a new one. Resolving it right away would put the one chord in an awkward spot. Instead, they pad it out with a pretty classic gesture, stepping from the 4 chord up to 5, but they seem a little uncomfortable there. Halfway through the bar, they bail off the C sharp and rise up to D. It's a really nice effect. They could pretty easily have done the typical rock thing of resolving 4 to 1 and not bothering with the 5 at all, or they could have committed to the full 4-5-1 cadence that they were starting to imply. But by introducing the 5 and then immediately bouncing off it to a much weaker note that can't really carry a resolution, we get another broken promise, where the harmony says one thing and then does something completely different. That leads to a return of the riff and then another verse with a new added synth line, combining the triplet groove of that noise part with the notes of the bass part. And that's going to happen a lot. Basically every section in this song introduces at least one new layer to the soundscape. That's classic synth pop. It's standard arranging advice to add new elements over time to build a satisfying dynamic contour, but synth music takes that to another level because it's just so easy to make new sounds. You don't have to go out and find someone who can play another instrument, you just turn some knobs and it all works. But that's also dangerous. Complete freedom means you have no guardrails, and it's so easy to go overboard. But Depeche Mode are careful. They never stop adding things, but they always balance them. New parts are natural evolutions of old ones, and they're mostly mixed in the background so they don't crowd out the main figures like the guitar riff, the vocals, or the stomps. I'm not going to pull out every line, but if you go back and listen to the song, try to pick out as many as you can. It's pretty impressive how much they were able to fit in there. Next is the return of the intro lyric.
Reach out, touch faith.
But this time we hear it in its full musical context. The stomps underneath it become a lot more intense, dropping that room tone reverb they had going and taking on a thicker, boomier quality. The rhythm has also simplified, abandoning that approach note for a more militaristic metronome pulse. The main pattern felt inviting and energetic, but this just feels like a threat. And that's made even more ominous by the synth walking down in half steps from the 2 to the flat 2, and then back to F sharp as the guitar comes back in with a riff. It's a really powerful moment. The unexpected darkness of the flat 2 combined with the aggressive new stomp pattern brings out the sinister undertones of Gahan's invitation. From there comes the chorus with one important new addition, an electronic noise pulse that simulates a snare. But the isolated track doesn't do this part justice because you don't get to hear when it happens. So far, every instrument has agreed on one thing. This song has a halftime backbeat. The stomps, the riffs, the various synths, they all place a clear accent on beat 3. And since the main job of a snare is to ride the backbeat, surely that's where this one is, right? Nah. It's playing what I like to call a backbeat fragment, which means that while it's on the metric level of the standard backbeat, and should thus be hitting beats 2 and 4, it only actually plays one of them, in this case, beat 4. Playing a complete backbeat would make the second chorus feel faster and more animated, but by sticking to just a fragment, you get to capture some of that metric excitement while maintaining the slower vibe. It also pulls the music off balance, with an uneven accent weighing down the end of the bar. That leads into another heavy stomping section, but this time the synth does something slightly different. It's still starting on G sharp and moving to a dissonant note, but instead of G natural, which could at least resolve cleanly to F sharp, it leaps a tritone away to D, stranding the harmony with no clear way to release the tension. So it doesn't try. It just stops, and we're left with the main stomp pattern all alone. Almost alone. There is one other layer here, and it sounds like this. That heavy breathing sounds deeply and unavoidably human, and the implied intimacy of it stands in sharp contrast to the harsh, synthetic timbres we've heard so far. It also makes explicit a thing that I've kind of avoided talking about so far, the obvious sexual metaphor of the song. Like, sure, at one level you can read it as being about an exploitative, manipulative religious figure, but it doesn't take much digging to find a parallel reading about an exploitative, manipulative romantic partner, someone taking advantage of your love while giving you very little in return. In the music video for this song, the section is even accompanied by Martin Gore performing what Wikipedia describes as suggestive mouth movements, so yeah, not a huge reach. But beyond the symbolism, there's also an interesting musical detail here. Breathing involves two distinct actions, inhaling and exhaling, and they sound slightly different. Seriously, try it yourself. If you use the back of your tongue to restrict the flow of air enough for a clear sound, then inhaling has, on average, a slightly higher pitch. But it's a triplet-based groove, so if he exhales on beats 1 and 3, then on beats 2 and 4, he's inhaling. It also sounds to me like he's changing his mouth position to accentuate those pitch differences, opening wider on the backbeats for more of a hissing tone, but the end result is the same. A percussive loop of low and high attacks on alternating beats, creating, more or less, the weirdest kick snare pattern I've ever heard. It's this, but with his mouth. And from here, I'd like to take a step back and look at the rest of the song a bit more holistically. There's an interesting philosophy of creation going on here that I think is easy to miss if we zoom too far in, so instead I'm just going to talk about two broad trends that define the last minute or so of the song. First, they keep adding layers. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of analyzing each one, although I do want to point out this synthetic version of the breathing pattern that comes in when the riff returns, because I think it's neat. But mostly, none of these new layers are individually that important. What's important is that the song seems to build forever, with new sounds popping up to take up more and more of the acoustic and metric landscape, so that by the end, the atmosphere is so dense and oppressive that it almost feels hard to breathe. And while the orchestration is expanding, the song form is contracting. They play the first verse again, but then, instead of going to the second, they jump straight to its final phrase. Then we get the intro lyric, but this time it's interrupted by the chorus. And that runs into that bluesy 4-chord thing after just a single line. Adding it all up, we've heard all three of the song's main sections in the span of roughly 20 seconds. For comparison, at the beginning of the song, we don't even hear the start of the first verse for almost a minute. And from there it devolves even further, falling into a repeated loop of 2 bars of the riff, then the heavy stomp section, then back to the riff as the tension of the atmosphere builds higher and higher until finally, as it nears its climax, everything disappears except an acoustic-sounding piano synth. Reach out and touch faith, as Gahan whispers a gentler, almost comforting version of that same ominous hook. That's pretty much it, but before you go, I just want to shout out the 12-Tone Discord server. I'm awful at promoting it, but it's a really cool place with a lot of really cool people talking about music and stuff, and if you like my work, you'll probably like it there too. There's a link in the description if you want to check it out. Just do me a favor and read the rules. The mods are great, and I'd like to make their jobs as easy as possible. Thanks. And hey, thanks for watching. Thanks to our featured patrons, Susan Jones, Jill Sungard, Howard Levine, Warren Hewart, Damian Fuller-Sutherland, Neil Moore, Jeff, and Michael Mole. Check out the Nebula Cup for a fuller outro, and as always, keep on rockin'.